Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, IDIS in 90 Minutes, Generating CDBG Reports in IDIS. Today's presenter is
Bill Kubel.
The call will last approximately 90 minutes. All callers are muted due to the high number of participants. The webinar will be recorded for future use and made available for viewing and downloading. If you are having audio difficulties, try using your telephone for audio instead of your computer speakers. If you have questions, you are welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the questions function on the GoToWebinar toolbar. Submit your questions by keying them in the text box under the questions pane on the toolbar. The presenter will answer some questions during the webinar. Others will be answered in a new FAQ document posted to the website www.comcon.org. And now I turn the presentation over to Bill.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It looks like we have a fairly good attendance rate, so it's good to have you on today. We're going to talk, do a couple things. We're going to walk through how to generate reports, and we're going to spend a lot of time on some CDBG specific reports, namely the financial summary report. We're going to spend some time on the GPR, or the activity summary report, the PR03, and we're also going to look at some of the new performance profiles. So hopefully you'll learn a lot, and you'll be able to take this back to your office and do some good things. Before we get started, I want to point out a few other resources that are available on this ComCon website. So I'm just going to click on that link. So this is the ComCon website for IDIS. If you've participated in one of the last 3 webinars we did, this is the 4th of 4. And the previously held webinars are going to be posted here. So if you weren't able to watch the ones last week or the one yesterday, they should be posted here as well as the slides. And once this one is finished, it will take a few days, but then they'll post this one as well. Also on this website, we have some training materials. So if you missed the live trainings we did last year, all the materials are available right here. And then finally, by the end of September, we should have some actual video modules of the 2-day live training. So keep an eye out for that. I'm sure you'll be hearing about it in some emails. But again, a lot of good resources on this website. So do visit it and check it out. Get back to the PowerPoint. So our agenda today is we're going to walk through the step-by-step on generating reports. We're going to explore some of the functionality available in MicroStrategy. If you've never downloaded reports before, MicroStrategy is the tool or the reporting system. It's outside of IDIS, but it works in conjunction with IDIS. So we're going to play around with that, how to move columns, how to sort, filter, things like that. Again, we're going to spend a lot of time on the financial summary report. That's one of the major reports you have to submit as part of your caper, and it's also one of the reports that a lot of grantees struggle with. So we're gonna play around with that and hopefully teach you a lot about it. We'll also spend some time on the activity summary report, PR03, and we should have a lot of time for questions and answers towards the end. Go ahead and submit your questions throughout the webinar. As Amber said, I may not be able to get to all of them during the webinar. If that's the case, if I'm not able to answer it during the webinar, I will try my best to get an email response out to you in the next few days, or we'll also post some FAQs to that website I just showed you, and we should be able to answer a lot of questions that way as well. So let's get started. How to generate reports this is just a kind of a schematic of where you start. In IDIS, there's a reports tab. Once you click on that, you'll see a folder, and it's pretty much folder driven. So you've used Windows Explorer, for example. It's a familiar concept. So you just kind of drill down to the one you want. Let's actually go into the system and do this. What you do is we'll go into IDIS. So here's the home page for IDIS. To get to reports, we're going to look at the main menu across the top, and over to the right we should see reports. If you have a fairly small screen, you may have to scroll to the right a little bit. So once we click on reports, we're going to see 3 reports listed here. These are not the reports that are available to you. These are basically parameter screens. So when I run the financial summary report, and we'll play around with this in a bit, I'll want to come here first and add any parameters that I want to appear on that report. To actually see all the reports in IDIS, we're going to click on this link here, which says View Reports. And when you do that, depending on which browser you're using, that's either going to open up another tab up at the top, or it's going to open up another window. And I actually already have that window open, so I'm just going to switch to it. So this is the MicroStrategy. One key thing to remember here, well, actually there's two key things to remember, is number one is this window is not in IDIS. So remember, we still have that 20-minute timeout period. If I go back to the home page, it talks about it over here. It says after 20 minutes without basically touching anything in this window, any of the links or buttons, the system's going to kick you out, and you'd have to log back in. Unfortunately, when it kicks you out of IDIS, it also kicks you out of MicroStrategy. So I know some grantees, they'll stack the windows here, just like this. And for the purpose of the webinar, I'll make mine full screen so you can see everything. But this way, if I'm going to get timed out of IDIS, usually the screen will kind of darken. It will turn a shade of gray, and I can hit that continue button, and that way I'll know I'm not kicked out of IDIS. So just one key tip, to ensure you don't get kicked out in the middle of generating reports. Another key point to raise here is if you look at the description by this folder, you'll see that the data on reports are current as of close of the last business day. So if I went in and changed a lot of information in the system, maybe I went in and reported accomplishments and completed some activities, that information I entered today is not going to show up on the reports until tomorrow. So there is a little bit of a lag there, and if you're facing crunch time to get your taper in, try to account for that towards the end of the year. Try to get that data in sooner. Give yourself at least a one-day lead time to generate these reports. All right, so again, I just want to get into IDIS. Some of you may see DRGR. Some of you may see a folder for eSnaps, which is the homeless system. Of course, we're interested in IDIS today. Now, we see a couple different functions and folders here. Shared reports, my reports, history list, my subscriptions, create a report. I'll talk about a few of them. Also, in addition, for each icon you see, you'll also see those choices repeated along here at the top. So shared reports, my reports, and this red toolbar will appear on each window. Shared reports is where you keep basically all of HUD's ad hoc reports. So these are, ad hoc reports, canned reports, I should say. These are the reports that HUD has generated and basically created templates for you. All you do is you go in there and select the ones you want, and it will populate with the most current data set. My reports is basically, with your shared reports, you're going to have an opportunity to kind of change the formatting here and there. And instead of each time changing the format, each time you generate that report, you can actually save a copy of your new customized template in the My Reports folder. So we'll show you how to do that as well. History list. In some cases, these reports are going to take a while to generate, and instead of just staring at the screen and waiting for these reports to generate, you can add them to your history list. And what that does is, if the system closes down, or if you close down the system and undertake some other tasks, you can come back in the system an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours later, and hopefully the reports would be ready by then, and you can just click on. You don't have to start from scratch, essentially. My subscriptions, I believe, is not currently working for IDIS users. I think it's working for DRGR users, but maybe not for IDIS users. We'll talk about the benefit of that in a little bit. And finally, we have Create Report down here, which is the ability to generate ad hoc reports. If you were a participant in the 2-day trainings we did last year, we said they'd be coming soon. Unfortunately, HUD has had to put this on hold, and there's no expected delivery date for ad hoc reporting at this point. So as of now, you should just rely on the canned reports. With that said, let's go ahead and go into the canned reports. Let's click on Shared Reports. And here we see a big long list of all the different reports we can generate. So they're up to, you can see each report is numbered. We're up to about 87 different reports out there. And so So quite a bit. Don't worry, you're not going to have to be familiar with all of these reports. It's basically, they're giving you a lot of data, but typically there's grantees out there who will find like maybe 4 or 5 reports that they like and will report, they'll generate on a regular basis, but I really don't know anybody out there who uses all of the reports. So we're going to come in here and look at some of the common reports. Let's flip back to the slides real quick. So again, this is kind of the step-by-step. So we clicked on the View Reports tab. We went into IDIS. We went into the shared folders. And so that's where we're at now. In this example, we would select PR02, which is the List of Activities report, and then enter some parameters. So this is just a screenshot of the shared reports folder. I'm going to probably spend most time in the live version instead of this, the slides, just so you can see some of the interactivity. And so this is an example of one of those reports folders. This is the one for PR26. So maybe we'll walk through that process for the PR26, since we're going to be talking about that report. I'm going to switch back to IDIS just because I do want to stay live and I don't want to lose our connection here. So I just come in here, interact with the system, in this case activities, and now I basically bought myself another 20 minutes. Okay, so let's do this. We'll scroll down. We'll find the PR26, the Financial Summary Report. And in a lot of cases, once you start getting used to IDIS reports, when you talk to your HUD reps, a lot of time they're going to refer to that report number. So that's what they're referring to. In this case, the Financial Summary Report is also known as the PR26. When I click on that folder, I see actually 4 different icons in here. And depending on which folder you click on, you might see 1 or more icons. In some cases, it's just one simple one. In this case, I have the main report, the Financial Summary Report, and then when we get into the financial report, you'll see that it's got about 30, 40 different line items, and you're not always sure what is being included in that line item. So these are kind of supplemental reports that will support and provide information on how the system came up with some of these numbers. In other cases, you might see one report for a field office, one report for the grantee, you might see one report for CDBGR, for the Recovery Act funding, and one for regular CDBG funds. So if you're not sure, maybe just play around with it. And it's typically the report titles will tell you what exactly is in that report. So let's click on PR26. And what we'll see is the parameters screen. We may see a short little detour. Okay, so this is the parameter screen, and this is it's going to look slightly different for each report, but this section up here is usually pretty standard. Okay, and the big mistake here is to actually read what it says. Choose from all attributes of the prompted grantee hierarchy. All it's really saying is go ahead and select which grantee you want the report for. It always starts at headquarters, and what we need to do is click on the little plus sign, and that's going to drill down to the next line, being all grantees. Some grantees will just click on this and use that, and since they only have access to their data, that will limit the report will be correct. What I found, though, is that takes a little time. You may be saving a couple steps here, but when it comes to generating the report, it typically takes longer. So I'm going to keep clicking on this plus sign. And there's my field office. There's Chicago. I'm actually using Oak Park today, so if anybody from Oak Park is out there listening today, hello. And so once you find the grantee or the selection you want, if you're a field office, maybe you want the entire field office, you find the one you want, you click on it so it's highlighted, and then you click on the right arrow, and then I see Oak Park, who I want, in my selected column. Once I see that, I'm in good shape. Okay? And this, again, this is a step that will you're going to have to do basically for each report. Now, depending on which report you selected, you may see some additional parameters here. So in my case, I see please enter a valid program year. So this is a report that's specific to a program year. This is one of your CAPER reports, something that you have to include in your CAPER report. So I'm going to do for 2010. I entered my parameters. I hit Run Report. And again, sometimes the reports will take a while, and I'll get this processing request. If I think it's taking too long, I can click on this button, which is Add to My History List. Okay, it's especially towards the end of the year when a lot of people are trying to generate reports. The reporting process can kind of stall out at this process. And again, I would recommend you to click on that Add to My History List. When you do so, if you do get kicked out of the system or if it's just taking too long and you want to go check email or do something else, when you come back, you can click on this link here, History List, and you should see that report listed, and it should be listed as ready. Okay, so here's a big long list of all the reports I've already done, and this is the one we generated. So if you did the history list and you come to here, you just click on the name of the report, and it will pull it back up. And here's our report. Okay, so that's pretty much the process. We start in IDIS, and we clicked on. Let's just review real quick. We started in IDIS, and we clicked on our Reports tab. Again, don't look here for your reports. We want to click on View Reports, so that'd be step 2. What that does is it opens up a new window. And this actually kind of shows you the process that we went. We started in the IDIS folder. This is sometimes called a crumb trail. We started in the IDIS folders, then we went to Shared Reports. Under Shared Reports, we found the report we were looking for, PR26. And once we did that, we were able to enter some parameters and generate the report. Okay. Now that we have the report generated, there's a couple different things we can do. You can see a lot of tools up here available to you in the MicroStrategy toolbar. Okay. Two that you'll use are you can export this as a PDF file, or you can export it to Excel. Okay. So if you just want a copy that you can look at and refer to and maybe email or post to the web, you can do a PDF. You're not going to be able to change any of that information because the PDF is static. It's just a view only. If you want to bring it in, and maybe the PR26 is the best example, but if you want to sort and filter different data sets, then you can bring it into Excel. Okay? I'm just going to bring it into Excel. PDF is fairly standard. You can accept the standard default selections they have. With Excel, they give you quite a few different selections. You can export it in Excel with just plain text as a CSV, which is a comma delimited file. You can use Excel with formatting, HTML, or plain text. Most people probably would choose Excel with formatting. The one exception is if you are going to do a lot of sorts and filters, then you probably just want to do Excel with plain text, and that way you'll be able to add those filters and sorts easier. So you click on Excel with formatting, you hit export. Again, it'll spin its wheels a little bit. It may take a few seconds, maybe even a few minutes to generate. Looks like it's working fairly fast here. And depending on which system you're using, I see something to protect my security. It says click on here, and then I can download and open the file. May just take a second. Here we go. So I open it up. And since I already have Excel open, I should see it up here. And I just click yes. It says it's in a different format, and I'll show you why. Once I hit yes, so this is what it looks like when you bring it into Excel. And again, once you're in Excel, it may not look pretty now, but you can format it a bit. And then one key thing, though, is when you save it, when you go to File, Save, make sure you save it as an Excel format. When you first try to save it, you'll see down here as Save As Type, it will try to save it as a web page. Make sure when you save it, especially if you made a lot of formatting changes, you save it as an Excel workbook, and then you'll be in better shape. Okay? So again, the process is fairly simple. It is quite a number of steps, but again, once you do it a couple times, and here you can see I got timed out. Let me get back in. Once you go through the process, maybe 2, 3, 4 times, you're going to find that it's a fairly straightforward process. what a lot of people have questions, and I imagine why a lot of folks are on this call, is basically doing some of the more advanced functions and some of the to find out what reports should you be using. Let me show you some of the advanced functions. I'm going to go to the history list, and I should see a list of all the different reports I've already downloaded. One is the PR07. This is a good report just to demonstrate some of the functionality of MicroStrategy. So I'm going to generate that report. So the PR07 is a drawdown report by voucher number. And if you can't see this, maybe I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so some really neat functionality. One is being able to filter by any of these categories. So what this report is it's a list of all the drawdowns I've ever done, including the voucher number, and that IDIS activity number, some dates, some amounts. So maybe I want to see a draw history for each activity. What I could do is maybe I click on my IDIS activity ID, and you see a space up here called page by. Okay. What that's going to do is if I click and drag, and when I do that, you're going to see it's moving, right? And when I get it up in the page by, you can see it's highlighted yellow. If I release my mouse here, what it's going to do is it's going to make that column a drop down. So now I don't want to see all of that data. I just want to see all of my drawdowns maybe for activity 552. And in that case, it's just limiting just for those. It's now showing just the vouchers and line items just for activity ID 552. Let me get one that's a little bit more interesting, maybe that has more draws. I know activity number 2 has more draws. So here you can see a draw history for all of the, all of the draws that were ever done against IDIS activity number 2. Okay. So again, it's a cool little feature. This page by, you can, if you don't want to do that anymore, if I want to take that down, I just click and drag back down to this section, and now I see everything. I can do the same thing with voucher number. So here's all the line items that were included on this specific voucher number. I'm going to bring that back down here. You can do it with fund type. So if I wanted to differentiate between my entitlement draws and my program income draws, in this case, my grantee has revolving loan funds. So here's all my revolving loan funds. I can use, program PY, which stands for prior year. So do I want it to be blank? Do I want it to be yes? So, just a quick way to filter through and find all of, to get through a very, very long report and find out just what you're looking for. Okay, so again, a very neat tool here is this fund type. Let me show you a couple more features available up here in this in the MicroStrategy. I'm going to switch to a different report. I'm going to switch to one of my BOSMAC reports. We'll talk about BOSMAC in a second. So let's see. Well, no, let's go back. Let's go back to that one. Or I can, yeah. Let's stick with that one. That's a good one just to demonstrate a couple things. Yeah, in addition to doing the page by, you can also do things like move columns. If I wanted to move, let's say the draw amount is too far over to the right here, if I click on that title and drag it, you can see it's moving, and I can position it right here, for example. So again, play around with it. Just some neat features available in MicroStrategy. A lot of people, they don't have time to play around with this. So a lot of the things that you do in MicroStrategy, you can also do in Excel. So for example, for the PR03 report, the GPR, the BOSMAC version, I usually will bring that into Excel, and I'm just going to show you kind of the final format here. Is I brought it into Excel, and I did basically the same functionality by adding filters in Excel. So if I wanted to see, this is a list of all of the activities that were active in a certain program year. In this case, I filtered by matrix code. So a lot more people are familiar with the filtering and functionality of Excel. So don't feel like you're forced into using the MicroStrategy functionality. It's there if you want to use it. But if you would rather use the functionality in Excel, you can go ahead and export it and do the same thing in Excel as well. So you have those two capabilities. Let's go back, and again, I'm going to keep trying to stay active. I don't want to get kicked out of the system. So I'm just going to do a quick search under activity funding, and again, that buys me 20 more minutes. Okay, so I already mentioned the history list. Again, this is a nice feature. If anything was taking too long to generate, maybe I just wanted to generate a whole bunch of reports and come back later to generate them, they will be added here. You can see the status. Whenever I come in here, it will give me a status whether it's ready. In one case, I tried to generate a report and it gave me an error, in which case I would have to basically delete this one out and try it again. If you just stay on the screen and nothing, it's going to be static, which means it's not automatically going to update. What you can do is hit the refresh button up here in the upper right-hand corner, and that will refresh the status for me. So again, if you're doing a lot of reports, I think it's a good idea to become familiar with the history list. It's a nice feature. Okay, let's switch back to the slides and let's talk about some specific reports available to us now. Okay, so here's a list. Again, we saw in the system there's almost 80, 90 reports available to you. This is a good list of key reports available to you that are not specific to CDBG, but very useful to CDBG grantees. One is the HUD grants and program income, the PR01. This is just a simple list of your grants, and it's organized by grant level, so it's not going to give you a lot of activity level detail or project level detail. It's really just it's going to give you summaries at the grant level. If you want that detail at the activity level, the PR02, it's probably the most popular report out there, the PR02. It's a simple list of all your activities by program year and project. It will give you the status, how much it's been funded for, how much it's been drawn, and the balance. So this is a good tool for just general program management. You want to find out which activities are still open, which activities are spending their money. You can generate this one on a monthly basis whenever you want, and it will help you track at least the financial progress of your activities. In terms of tracking your performance, it's the PR03, the Activity Summary Report. Some people still call it the Grantee Performance Report or the GPR. And this is one of those reports that, again, part of your CAPER report. It's going to include every activity that was open during a specific program year and give you a lot of details on what occurred in terms of accomplishments. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the PR03 and the PR26, which is the Financial Summary Report. Again, the PR26 is part of your CAPER report. It's going to show HUD that you're in compliance with a couple of the rules of the CDBG program, including whether you spent 70% on activities that met a low mod national objective. It will check your public service cap. It will check your planning and admin cap, among a few other things. Some slightly relatively newer reports are the PR83 and 84, which track some of the additional performance measures. We'll take a look at those. PR85 is a performance measure report specifically on housing activities. PR86 is a report for CDBG-R activities. And then there's actually something called the CDBG Performance Profile, which is available outside of IDIS if you just go to the CDBG website. It's something very similar is also in two new reports, the PR51 and 54. So we'll be taking a look at those as well. So let's talk about the Activity Summary Report, the PR03. Again, this is a CDBG-only report. It's not going to have any ESG or home activities on it. It will include all open activities. So if I have some 2004, 2005, 2006, some older prior year activities that are still open in my 2010 program year when I generate this report, those activities will show up, okay? So the point of that is HUD wants to see anything that was active within that program year. It will include any activities that have draws within the program year. So if I had a 2009 activity and it drew money on the very first day of 2010, then I completed it, it would still show up in the 2010 report since it was active in the 2010 year. And then it will also include any activities with a completion date in the program year. The report is activity by activity, and when you print it out the PDF version, and that's going to be the one you're going to include in your caper. If you're a large grantee, this can be several hundred pages long because it's going to include any activity that was open during the program year. So if you had 400 activities open during the program year, this report will be at least 400 pages long. You probably want to print out a couple copies for public review, but a lot of HUD reps, just given the length of the report, they've gone ahead and said when you submit you can submit an electronic version to HUD for their review instead of printing out 4 or 5 copies of the same report that's hundreds of pages long. But again, that's on a kind of a CPD rep by CPD rep basis. Make sure you clear that with them and make sure you submit what they're asking for. So at the activity level, they're collecting proposed accomplishments, actual accomplishments, beneficiary data by race and ethnicity and income, how much was funded, how much was spent in the program year and overall, and then the narrative as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at this report. So let's just take a second to generate it. I'm going to go back to shared reports. I'm going to go to PR03. And I see 2 versions of it. I see just the regular PR03, and then I see the BOSMAC reports. The BOSMAC was an old tool available under the old version of IDIS that allowed you to basically take these reports, format them in Excel where you could quickly sort and filter, and it would give you a neat breakout of and basically an ability to find out what was missing in the reports. Let's do this first. Let's run the real report because it may take a while to run. Again, I'm going to choose my grantee from this top section. Click on these plus signs. Keep going, keep going, keep going. We get to Oak Park. So I selected my grantee. I'm going to run it for 2010. And in this case, the system wants to know, should I run it for CDBG-R or CDBG? In this case, I'm doing CDBG, and I hit Run Document. Again, it could take a while. I'm going to add it to my history list, which I think is always a good practice. This means I don't have to just sit here and wait and watch for it to spend. So now I'm actually going to come back to these other windows and show you some of the BOSMAC tools here. So another benefit of the history list is you can run multiple reports at the same time. Under BOSMAC, you see a couple of different slices. One is the original, which will just bring it into Excel. Then you have PR03 Public Service Activities. It's going to list all the public service activities that were basically active within that program year. So the purpose of this is to help you tie back into your PR26. We'll do that in a little bit. We have something called the main BOSMAC report and the PR03D, which is going to list all your job creation activities, your LMJ activities, that didn't create any jobs, or maybe they spent more than $35,000 per job. This is a nice tool for your field office staff to basically double-check compliance with some economic development activities. I'm going to click on Main BOSMAC Report because it has some special functionality. And again, I'm going to run the report. Hopefully it will come up pretty quick. And again, I'm going to add it to my history list. Oh, here it is. So that one didn't take too long. Now, it doesn't look too impressive right now, but what happens is it kind of gives you some indicators or some categories of how your PR03 report is looking. So instead of, flipping through a printed version of a 500-page report, it will kind of give you some key things to look at. So, for example, count of activities that have not been canceled. And you'll see that if I move my mouse over any of these, you can see each one is linked. So if I wanted to find out, this is a good one, it's which one I'm looking for. Here I go. Count of activities, prior activities that are not completed without a narrative. Okay, so again, one of the things your representative is going to look for is they'll want to see a narrative for each activity. So Oak Park did a fairly good job, but they missed one activity. They didn't provide a narrative here. So if I click on this, it will tell me which exactly report or which activity didn't have a narrative. So here it is. This is chore services. So what I want to do is go in and provide a narrative and then wait till tomorrow and rerun the report, and I would submit that version of the report to HUD. So the BOSMAC, what the BOSMAC is going to do for you is it's going to basically give you an opportunity to check that all of your data is there, that it's complete, and it makes sense. And then once you use that to kind of clean up all of the data, then you run the PDF version that I ran previously. So again, it's a really nice tool. It's very thoughtful, where you can use it to really make sure that your PR03 is complete. Notice that I'm not seeing a lot of different categories. If I look over here, it's showing me columns 1 of 10 through 26. So to see those other ones, I click on this little black arrow over to the right. So here's some other activities, or some other categories, I should say. Here's one, completed activities with no accomplishment data. And so there's 5 activities that Oak Park completed, but they didn't provide accomplishment data. So let's go ahead and take a look at those and see if we have to go back and clean up some data. So here's those 5 activities that didn't report data. And actually, they're in good shape, because if you look at the matrix code here, these are all planning, which is 20, or admin matrix codes. So it makes sense that they didn't provide any accomplishment data there. But again, this tool, this BOSMAC tool, if you had any non-admin activities there, you'd want to go in and make sure that if no accomplishments were reported, and you shouldn't really be completing activities without accomplishments, they can still be open without accomplishments, you would want to provide a good detailed narrative in there to explain what's going on with that specific activity. So again, this BOSMAC tool, and again, this one's the main BOSMAC report. It will give you some neat tools to make sure that your data is complete when you actually fill out and submit your final PR03. And then here's some other categories talking about job activities. Percent funds obligated for public service activities, we're at 13%. And for planning and admin, that's what PA stands for, we're at 19%. So very quickly, just using this report, these are the same numbers we're going to see on the PR26. We can see we're under our 15% cap and our 20% cap. Okay, so this is the main BOSMAC version. I'm going to go ahead and look at my history. Let's see if my PDF is correct, ready. And look, okay, so again, I could play around with one report, and while this one was still generating, save myself some time. Now that it's generated, I can look at it in the system, or I can automatically just export it or generate a PDF. So why don't we walk through the steps of generating the PDF. I just click on that icon. It may take a second here. Trying to generate that file for me. If it takes too long, I can move on to the next report I want to show you. So while we're doing that, let me show you another version of the BOSMAC report. So the one we were just looking at was the main BOSMAC report. And then this one, the PR03 BOSMAC Original, this is the one you can bring into Excel, and it's fun to play around with in Excel. I already generated it, so I'm just going to open up the Excel version that I already generated. Okay, and so here what I've done is I basically just formatted it to make sure it looks nice and pretty. And I did a couple things. I added some data filters at the first row. And if you're not familiar with Excel, if you don't know how to add data filters, it's a fairly simple process with Excel. Depending on what version of Excel you're using, basically you just go to the top, go under Data, and click the Filter button. When you click Filter, you'll see that your drop-down arrows. Each column header is given drop-down arrows. So I like this report a lot just because I can use these filters to quickly go in and find out what exactly I'm looking at. So for example, just like the other BOSMAC report, I can scroll over. I can look for activities that don't have a narrative. So it includes the narrative. If I come over here, I can say, well, show me anything without a narrative. Well, here are some activities without narrative. And again, a lot of them are admin, so Oak Park did a good job. But here's this old activity, chore services from 2007. If I was a CPD rep, I would want to know why this activity is still open. And so the grantee would have a chance to provide a narrative and say why this activity is still open. So just, again, one example of using this BOSMAC tool to clean up and find out what's going on with your data before you actually submit it to HUD. You can also use this. I'm going to show you this after I get into the PR26, the financial summary, to kind of back into some of the numbers that do show up on the PR26. So we'll take a look at that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can generate that PDF version of the PR26 now. Just going to find out where we were. Okay, here, it looks like it's finally ready. I'm going to go ahead and download it and open it. So this is what it looks like. This is probably the version you're going to submit to HUD. You know, if we take a look at the Excel version that I just looked at, you know, this is very hard to read. Nobody would want to actually sit down and try to comprehend this. This is more of a data cleanup tool, the BOSMAC version. But the PDF, that's the one that you're going to actually print out and submit with a version of your CAPR. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So again, you can see Oak Park's a fairly small, well, they're a medium-sized grantee, and their report is 69 pages long. So it can get very long. Here's an example of the rehab activity. It provides description. A lot of the information you provide under setup, including objective outcome, matrix code, national objective. The financing information is going to be 3 different categories. Let me find actually a better one, maybe you can see. We'll just look at this one. This is a counseling center. There's 3 financial amounts here. The funded amount, that's how much it was funded for, drawn through program year, and then drawn in program year. So drawn through program year is all of the money drawn before 2010 and in 2010. Drawn in program year, this amount right here, is just the amount that was drawn in the given program year. Remember, we're generating this report for a specific program year. So you may see prior year activities where it was funded for $100,000, it's drawn for $100,000, but only maybe $3,000 were drawn within the program year. So this version of the CAPR should talk about, you know, what was done overall and what was specifically done with the final $3,000. Here's a good example where you can have multiple reports or program years for a single activity. In this example, this activity, it's showing the narrative for both 2010 and 2011. It will also show the number benefiting for each specific year. So again, a very nice detailed report, giving you a lot of information. It's breaking down the race and ethnicity by owner and renter, giving total and person. So it's okay to see a lot of zeros. In this case, this is a public works department activity. It's not a housing activity, so we don't see anything under owner or renter. We see everything under person. We also have a section on income, where they're reporting income levels. And in this case, this is a limited low mod area activity, so it's also showing percent low mod. So we're over the 51% threshold. We're in good shape. Okay, so this is the version you're going to print out for the CAPR, the printed version of your CAPR. But again, I would highly recommend you to use the BOSMAC to clean up some of your data first. So the recommended process here is, you know, run the BOSMAC version, as soon as your program year is over, or as soon as you have a majority of your accomplishment data in the system. Once you find out what's missing, go ahead and identify the pieces that are missing and start pushing your subrecipients and the people in your office who are responsible for those programs to really get you that data. You want to make sure you get your data in IDIS before you submit your CAPR to HUD. And that CAPR is due within 90 days of the close of your program year. So again, it's best if you can start early with identifying those missing data pieces. Another good practice, it's not on the slide, but is to try to enter those accomplishment data, pieces of data throughout the program year. And that way you're not stuck with this big data entry push. You're not stuck with this big data entry push at the end of the year. Okay. So once you get that data more complete, once you run your BOSMAC a couple times, you identify what's missing, you go back in the system to load that data and input that data, then you run the PDF version, and that's the version you make available for your public and the version you submit to HUD. Okay? Let's move on and talk about the PR26. I see some people are submitting some good questions. Go ahead and submit those. Again, I'm going to try to get through our structured material here and then cover those reports at the end. So I think we're doing okay in time. We should still have a lot of time towards the end to answer those questions. So let's go over some slides in the financial summary. There's 5 different parts. There's the first just summarizes the resources that were available to you. The second summarizes all of your expenditures, again, for a program year. Okay, what was available to you during that program year? Resources. What was spent during that program year? Expenditures. Part 3 is the low mod benefit test. So one of the overall rules of the CDBG program is that you have to certify that at least 70% of your funds are expended on activities that meet a low mod national objective. So if you flip that around, you can spend up to 30% on things like slum and blight and urgent need. Most people don't have a problem meeting this test unless you're doing a lot of slum and blight, or maybe you had an emergency and had to spend a lot of money on urgent need. So, but we'll go over and make sure that you understand those calculations. One area that grantees have a lot of problems with is the public service cap calculation and the planning and admin cap calculation. So public service, you're set at 15%, and planning and admin, you're at 20%. We'll take a look at each one of those. 2 big issues that people have is you have unexpended funds at the end of the previous year, how to handle that, and how to use your prior year flag and unliquidated obligations effectively to calculate those public service and planning and admin caps. So before you generate your report, you have to fill out this parameter screen. So let me go back into IDIS. You can see I got kicked out. So I'm going to go ahead and get logged back in here. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the Reports tab. And again, I see this this parameter screen for CDBG Financial Summary Report. If you're state listing out there, you'll actually use the state PER, which is the PR28. You won't want to use the PR26. So I click on Add Edit. And there's all of these different fields that you can set and to make slight adjustments to your PR26. It's good to note that anytime you're using one of these adjustment fields, like for line 7 here, you can see adjustment to compute total available, that you actually include a footnote in your report to explain to HUD why you needed to make that adjustment. There's a lot of grantees out there. You won't have to use any of these fields except the very first one, okay? And the very first one is unexpended CDBG funds at the end of the previous reporting period. Unless you're the best grantee in the world and you spend all of your CDBG funds every year before your program year is over, you're going to have to report something in this field, okay? So basically, this is basically just your balance of funds that you're carrying forward into the current program year. How do you know what to put in this field? Well, if you've been doing the PR26 correctly, let me go ahead and show you a version of it. You get a slightly prettier version. Okay, so here is your financial summary report. And again, part 1, we're talking about providing an amount in this this row right here, line 1, unexpended CDBG funds. This is something you have to populate yourself. Well, basically, if you look at your last year's, this is a report for 2010. If you look at your PR26 for last year, you can see that line 16 is your unexpended balance. So essentially, this is a good thing for HUD to kind of tie your reports together, is basically line 16 for 2009, your unexpended balance at the end of 2009 becomes your starting balance for 2010. Okay? So if you don't provide this amount, what this is going to do is it's going to throw off all the rest of these numbers. And in some cases, if you spent more money in your program year than you received an entitlement, what will happen is your unexpended balance will actually be negative. Okay? So everybody, I can almost guarantee that every single grantee out there will need to report something in this parameters field for line 1. The rest, a lot of grantees can get away with not putting anything in here, but we'll go over each one of these different parameters that you can use in the slides. Okay, so you can see in Oak Park's case, they reported some unliquidated obligations for public services. We reported an adjustment for the public service cap, and I'll explain why we made these adjustments. So let's go back to the slideshow. Again, I'm sorry, I keep flipping back and forth, but it's a little confusing. So one more thing here is once you enter all these parameters, what you want to do is make sure you save the screen. Okay, make sure you save it, and then once you save it, once you generate the PR26 in MicroStrategy, all those changes should appear in your report. You can also come back and look at older years. So for example, this has been around for a few years now. I can look at 2009 and see what was done in 2009. I can look and see what was done in 2008. Okay? So again, make sure you save this page first and then generate the PR26. Okay, so let's talk about the part 1. Part 1 is calculating the available resources for that year. Some of these, and you can see over here on the slide, I've indicated which ones are going to be done by the system and which ones will be provided by you, the user, on that parameter screen I just showed you. So line 2, which is entitlement grant, that's going to be provided by the system. If you have old urban renewal funds, and not a lot of people do, you can provide that on the parameter screen. If you get Section 108 funds, you can provide that on the parameter screen. The system will also include current year program income. And I want to take a break here and talk about how the system generates this program income amount. When you create a receipt for program income, you'll notice that it allows you to specify a program year. The system pretty much ignores that field. What it does is it looks at the receipts that were created in the program year in question. So if I create a receipt for 2010, but I actually create the receipt in 2011, it's going to show up on my 2011 PR26. So with that in mind, if you have any program income, and it's important because program income will affect both your public service cap and your planning and admin cap, if it's important to include it in that program year, go ahead and on the last day of your program year, make sure you receipt any program income that has not yet been receipted. And that way you'll ensure it shows up on the correct program year. So just put it on your list of things to do towards the end of the program year. On the last day of your program year, if you create a receipt for anything that hasn't been receipted into the system, you'll be in good shape here. Okay. Also, it will calculate returns based on any repayment receipts you entered. And then again, each section is going to have this adjustment line where you can make, let's say, in your case, you should have received $10,000 of program income in 2010, but you didn't get around to it until 2011. Maybe you didn't get your bank statement until 2011, until your 2011 program year, I should say. You could actually make an adjustment here to reflect that $10,000, and then the system is going to calculate a total. So we can just flip over to Excel real quick and see a live version of it. So in this case, Oak Park reported they had $471,000 left at the end of 2009, so that carries forward into 2010. The system provided the entitlement grant, the system provided how much program income was received in the year, and it calculates the total. Okay, so let's look at Part 2. Part 2 is the expenditures. How much was dispersed for other than 108 loan repayments in planning and admin? The reason the system breaks this out is because this is the number that will be used for your low and moderate income test in Part 3. That's the only reason the system breaks that out. Again, you can see the system provides a space where you can make an adjustment to that. And then it comes up with that amount subject to the low mod benefit test. So this is the number in line 11 that's used in the next section to make sure you meet that 70% threshold. It also shows that the dispersed for planning and admin, and it calculates how much was dispersed for Section 108 repayments. Again, you get an adjustment, and it comes up with your total expenditures and your unexpended balance. So a lot of grantees I know, they like to keep an eye on that unexpended balance. You know, hopefully your unexpended balance here, 668, is somewhat close to what you started out. That means you don't have more money coming in than going out. You know, it's not a scientific measure, but it's something, you know, it provides you a nice little idea of how much money you're going to have to spend next year to keep in line with your 1.5 test. So the reason I have these two highlighted is, you know, sometimes grantees may say, well, why does it say this amount? How is the system coming up with this 389 for dispersed in IDIS for planning and admin? And this is one of those times where you can really use that PR03 BOSMAC report to kind of cross-reference the different reports. So like I said, I downloaded that PR03 report. I downloaded that PR03 report and I brought it into IDIS. And again, this has all of the activities that were active, so I should be able to back into that number. Basically, it's trying to figure out, you know, all my planning and admin draws for the program year. So I can use my matrix code to limit that. If I go to my matrix code drop-down, and I will select all my planning and admin activities, which are basically in the 20 series and 21, and click OK. So now I'm just looking at my planning and admin activities that were open in the year, and drawn in amount. Remember, we have two drawn amounts: drawn through, which is going to include prior year activities that were open in the current year, and drawn in amount is how much was actually drawn in that program year. So my total is 389,226, and that should match the 389,226. So again, this is a really neat tool, the BOSMAC, where I can back into the total amount drawn for specific categories on that on the PR26. I can do the same thing for total expenditures. I spent about 1.8 million. If I just clear that filter and show everything, I see that same amount down here in the total. I'll go ahead and highlight that for you. So again, you can back into these numbers. If you don't know why this number, or maybe your local books don't match this number, again, use that PR03, the BOSMAC, and find out how the system is generating this number. Okay, let's move on to Section 3. So Section 3 is the low mod benefit test. Again, the overall rule is that you have to spend 70% on your on activities that meet a low and moderate income national objective. So any activities that you do for slum and blight, or any activities you do for urgent need, will not count towards that. The system will allow you to meet this, or I should say the program rules allow you to meet this on a 1, 2, or 3-year basis. So if you are doing a lot of slum and blight, or if you are using urgent need, you know, over 30% in any given year, what you can do is go ahead and certify that you'll meet it on a 2-year basis or a 3-year basis. And the place you do that is in your action plan. Each time you submit your action plan, you have to sign some certifications, or your chief elected official has to sign some certifications, and that is where you indicate whether you want to do a 1, 2, or 3-year certification. Okay, so a couple adjustments here. You don't always have to use it, but if you have an NRSA, a Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy area, basically that will affect what counts towards your low mod benefit test. Or if you do any multi-unit housing, so maybe you're doing some rental rehabs where you know, with more than one unit per building, that's going to be calculated by you, okay? You're going to have to provide those numbers on that parameter screen. And there's some really good guidance out there. If you're in one of those boats where you're doing multi-unit rehab or even new housing construction with multi-unit, or you have an NRSA or a CDFI, you'll have to provide these fields for you. And there's some calculations, you know, some permutations you have to go through. Again, the system will provide some additional reports to you. Let me just pull that up. When you go to generate, let me close this down first. So when you go to generate your PR26 and you're unsure whether you need to put anything in that in those line 17s and 18s, you can run these detail reports, and these are activities to consider. So you're not necessarily going to include there, but activities to consider putting in line 17, activities to consider to put in line 18. And I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but there is some good guidance that HUD has made available in terms of how to calculate the number, the amount of credit you get for your low mod benefit test. If anybody's interested in that, I'll go ahead and post a link to the FAQ. Go ahead and send a question, and we'll make sure we include that in the FAQ. Line 19 is basically just anything else that's going to calculate or be included in the test, and the system calculates that for us. Again, as with every calculation, it's going to give us a chance to adjust that, and it's going to calculate the percentages for us. So let's go ahead and take a look at a live example. So in this case, Oak Park doesn't have an NRSA. They don't do any multi-unit housing. Basically, everything they do is going to fall within this category here, and that's fairly standard. A lot of grantees, if you don't do any slum and blight or urgent needs, basically all your activities are going to be included here. So you can see after the calculation, they're at 100%, which is way above 70%. So again, they're in good shape here. What you want to do is make sure that this number is over 70%. If you do a multi-year certification for a 2 or 3 year certification, you're basically going to have to run this report for all 3 years or all 2 years, depending on whether you're doing a 2 or 3 year certification. And then you're going to have to provide this information by hand, so manually input that information. So it is slightly more work, but in some cases it's necessary if you're doing a lot of slum blight work or a lot of urgent needs. Let's move on to part 4. Which is the public service test. Whoops. Okay, so this is just giving you an idea of how they're making that calculation. Again, I want to kind of get through this real quick so we can leave time for questions. I don't think this applies to a lot of people. If you have questions about it, go ahead and please use that question feature, and we'll go ahead and address it at the end. So part 4 is the public service calculation. What it's going to do is it's going to calculate, number 1, your cap. It's going to take 15% of your current year's allocation and 15% of prior year program income. So the more program income you generated in the last year, the higher your public service cap will be. So that's the total available for your services. It will also calculate how much you obligated during the program year, because that's really what's tested in this public service cap calculation. It's not how much you spent, it's how much you obligated in the given program year. So the way HUD does that is they kind of back into it. First, they look at how much you spent, and that's included in public service disbursements. Then they look at what's called current year unliquidated obligations. So this is basically funds that have been obligated under contract or agreement that have not been spent when you're running your report. So maybe they're going to be spent, maybe you just haven't processed those draws, or maybe they're going to carry that contract into the next program year. Okay? So basically, if you think about it, it's how much you spent plus the balance. That gets you to your funded amount. What you also have to do is back out any prior year unliquidated obligations. So let's imagine I had a 2009. Well, actually, we'll get through an example so you can see how this all plays out. But that's essentially how you come up with your total obligations. So you would basically want this amount right here, your total obligations, to be less than your total available. Okay? So how does that work out? Well, again, you take your total dispersed in IDIS for public services, and that's calculated by the system. Basically, anything coded with a public service matrix code drawn in that program year, the system's going to include in this line. Line 28 and line 29 are entered by you, the user, on that parameter screen. So what you'd want to do is on line 28, provide any balance of monies you still need to draw for public service activities, and you'd want to enter that on the parameter screen. I'll show you how you can use the PR03 to quickly calculate what that amount is. And then on the line 29 is public service unlocated obligations at the end of the previous program year. So this is, again, something that you're going to have to calculate yourself, and it's basically the balances that you were carrying forward into the program year for prior year public service activities. I'll show you how to use the PR03 to do that as well. And then, again, the system just calculates it. So line 28 and 29, and also let's see how we can get to line 27 as well. I'll go back to our live example. So line 27 was dispersed in IDIS for public services. So how is the system coming up with this 275 amount? Again, if I go back to my PR03, I can search just for matrix codes, just for my public service matrix codes. So that's going to include all my 05s. And if you do homeless services, remember that homeless services isn't in 05. It's actually in 03. So even though it's an 03 matrix code, this 03T, that's a homeless services, I want to include that in my public services. So again, I look at the drawn in amount. This is all the money that was drawn in 2010 and 275, 151. So again, that's how the system is coming up with this number. Again, the PR03 is a very nice tool to back into that number. How do I figure out line 28? I want to calculate all of the monies I have left over at the end of my 2010 year that I'm going to carry forward into 2011. Right now I have 0, and that's because if I look at my balance column over here, for all of my 2010 activities, I'm not going to carry forward any balances. So that's why this amount here is 0. But let's say my dental clinic here, let's say they still had $6,000, and I was going to let them carry that forward into 2011. I would want to put in $6,000 in this field. And what that's going to happen is that's going to bump up my total obligation. Okay, it's not going to do it right now in Excel because you have to enter it in that parameter screen. Now on line 29, how did I calculate this? Unliquidated obligations at the end of the previous program year. And I see I have $8,965. Where does that come from? Well, I can see I had a 2007 activity, a public service activity. It didn't draw all its money in 2007. It actually spent the money in 2010. But again, the rule is when the money, or the HUD's not looking at how much was spent in that program year. They want to know how much was obligated in the program year. So this 2007 money was actually obligated in 2007. That's going to be included in my 2007 PR26. So in this case, by reporting my $8,965, I'm essentially backing out that $8,965 out of this money, because if you look at the obligation calculation right here, you can see it adds in line 27 plus line 28 and then subtracts out line 29. So again, I'm backing out the $8,900 out of this 275 because it doesn't belong there. This money was obligated in 2007, so it's included in the 2007 numbers as opposed to 2010 when it was drawn. So I hope that makes sense. I know I went through that fairly quickly, but again, you want to make sure that you're correctly reporting on unliquidated obligations, both line 28 and 29, or else you might be pushed over your cap. And again, we're going to walk through an example there. This part down here, line 32 through 35, this is calculating how it's getting that 15%. So it's taking your entitlement grant, it's taking prior year program income. We have an adjustment here, and it's taking basically 15% of that amount to come up with our total cap. In this case, we're at 13%, so in this case, Oak Park is in good shape. Let me get back to the slides. Okay, so one issue a lot of grantees do have is there's another feature in the system called prior year flag. Okay, and so prior year flag allows you to, let's say you got an invoice in, let's say your program year is January through December, so your program year ends in December, and your subrecipients who carry out your public service activities, they did not submit their invoice until January. So they didn't get their last 2010 invoice into you until 2011, which means you're actually going to do the drawdown in 2011. If you did the drawdown in 2011, when you look at your PR26, it would actually be included in the dispersed for public services on the 2011 report. That's not exactly correct, right? Because we want that money to show up in our 2010 report. So when you have costs that were incurred in the 2010 year, but you actually didn't do the drawdown until 2011, that's when you want to flag that draw as a prior year flag. So by doing so, if I did, and it's only going to be available for 90 days after the close of your program year. And what's due in 90 days? Your CAPER. That's why they put that time limit there. So any draws done 90 days after the close of your program year that you want, that where the costs were incurred in the previous program year, go ahead and use that prior year flag. So if I did the draw in 2011, but I used that prior year flag, it will still show up as dispersed in 2010, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so in the other example, let's say that same public service provider, they had a balance of funds. Let's say they had $10,000 left at the end of 2010, and they were not going to spend it. They were not going to incur the cost until 2011, and you were going to let them do that. That is when you use the unliquidated obligations. So by the close of the program year, they haven't spent all of their money. You contractually obligated to give them to them if they submit eligible costs for reimbursement, but they have not yet done it. So when you're using the prior year flag, it's for costs that were incurred during the program year, but weren't drawn until after the close of the program year. Unliquidated obligations are funds that are still committed at the end of the program year, where the cost will be incurred in the new program year. That's the difference between prior year flag and unliquidated obligations. So based on that scenario, you're going to use one or the other, but not both. Okay? So don't mark a draw as prior year flag and then also include it in your unliquidated obligations. Actually, once you do a drawdown, then those funds, that obligation has actually been liquidated and it's no longer unliquidated. Okay, so here's an example. Let's just use a very simple numbers. You have a $20,000 public service cap, and let's assume that you budgeted all $20,000. Only $15,000 is spent in the first year. You're going to let that the grantee is going to let that subrecipient extend their contract into the next year. So that $5,000 balance, they're going to extend that into the next program year, into 2011. This is what your PR26 would look like. The $15,000 will show up in dispersed, and then you on the PR26 parameter screen are going to have to report current unliquidated obligations of $5,000. And that gets us back to our $20,000, which is what HUD wants to test. They want to see how much you obligated in that program year. When 2011 rolls around, you're going to disperse $20,000 plus the $5,000 that should have been counted here. So in total, you're going to disperse $25,000. If I don't make any adjustments on these two line items, HUD's going to think you're over your cap. Okay? But since these $5,000 were reported as unliquidated obligations in 2010, I'm going to report the negative here for a previous year, and that gets me back down to my $20,000. So this is a good example of how to use these two line items when you have carryover on your public services from one year to the next. Okay, so I think that was basically showing the same thing. Okay, quickly let's get through the PR26 the planning and admin cap formulas so we can answer some questions. Essentially, it's the same type of thing as with public services, except with planning and admin, you're allowed to use 20% of your current allocation and 20% of current year program income. So public service is based on prior year program income, and your admin cap is based on current year program income. And then you have the same adjustments for unliquidated obligations. Okay. So again, very similar. Let me get to the line, the live version of it. So this is how much we spent. In this case, Oak Park didn't have any adjustments, so that's carrying over to 389. These are the amounts that are used to report on, basically to figure the cap. And in this case, you can see I have a negative adjustment here. And the reason we did a negative adjustment is because of that program income issue. We actually reported $37,000 of program income that in 2010 that should have been reported in 2009. So this is our way of backing it out. And when we did this, we made sure that we put in a footnote in the PR26 so HUD knows why we made that adjustment. And if we didn't make this adjustment, we would have been over our cap. Okay, so again, the concept, however, with unliquidated obligations is the same, where you can see that it's adding in this line, obligations at the end of the current year, and it's subtracting out obligations that you had from the previous program year. And it will come up with that 20% for you. Okay, so quickly, let's just summarize what we saw. Always report in line number 1 on that parameter screen, and you can use line 16 from the prior year to go ahead and fill that out. Otherwise, your report may look funny. One thing I didn't tell you was if you run this report right on the first day, or basically the last day of your program year, you should be able to reconcile line 16 to the total amount available in your entitlement grants for PR01. Okay, those lines should be similar. If not, you might have the wrong starting number in line number 1. Again, use the detailed reports, use PR03, the BOSMAC version, to kind of drill down and find out how HUD is coming up with those numbers. And just remember, if your public service cap or your planning and admin cap is over, you should be fine if you budgeted correctly. The only reason you would be over is if you over budgeted, if you budgeted over the 20%, if you budgeted over the 15%. So if you know you did that correctly, but the report is still showing you're over budget, you're over the 15%, you're over the 20%, what that means is you probably failed to make those unliquidated obligations adjustments, or maybe you failed to make some prior year flag adjustments. So keep that in mind. Okay. Before we get into the summary, let me pull up 2 more reports HUD wanted to demonstrate, and these are the PR51 and 54, I believe. The 51 and the 54. The 51 is a nice short little summary for a specific program year. In this case, it's the 2010 program year. And what it does is it just gives you how many housing units or anything. This could be home buyer assistance as well, but in this case, Oak Park only does rehab. How many housing units you finished, public services by matrix code, and the number of persons benefiting for public services. So again, a real nice, simple summary. This would be a good sheet you can give to the decision makers in your community, something you can share with your public, because it's just very easy to read and very easy to see where you are spending your money and who is being assisted. The PR54 is slightly more interesting just because it's got lots of graphs and interesting things to look at. It starts off with expenditures by activity type, so you can kind of see a breakout of how you are spending money. In this case, Oak Park's spending about 11% on housing. They're spending a good amount on public facilities, right at the cap for public services, and then planning and admin. If you're slightly over in this case, for planning and admin, you keep in mind that HUD's not looking at this for compliance. This is probably because they spent some of their 2009 monies for admin in 2010. It doesn't take into account those unliquidated obligations we just talked about. And then it gives you a nice graph and just a nice visual of that. It also gives you your timeliness ratio, so you can see Oak Park's in good shape. As long as that's under 1.5, you're in good shape. It gives you how you're targeting your income or your funds according to national objective. And again, just like on the PR26, we can see that this grantee is spending all their money on low mod and nothing on slum blight or nothing on urgent need. Scrolling down, it will give you a summary of beneficiaries by race and ethnicity. So this is good information if you're doing your AI, see where you're targeting your programs and if everybody's benefiting from your programs. It also breaks it down by income. It gives you a graph over here to the right. And one thing to notice is if you're over, you may not be providing the correct breakout in the system. Some people have been just reporting everybody as moderate income in IDIS, and what it will show is extremely low at 0 and low at 0 and moderate at, towards 100%. If that's the case, you might want to make sure that you are reporting data correctly according to the breakout that's required. Okay, there is actually a statute, part of the CDBG statute, that says you cannot design your program to serve moderate income persons to the exclusion of low and extremely low people. So if you do that and the information is legitimate, you truly are serving everybody at moderate and nobody under low or extremely low, you may actually have to redesign your programs and start targeting some of these folks. Okay, and then the last part is just a summary of accomplishments, jobs created, households receiving housing assistance, persons receiving, and here's a nice number, funds leveraged for activities completed. You don't want to see that 0. If you see that at 0, that means you're not completing the other funding section in the setup activities. Okay, so we went through these reports real quick. Again, what I would recommend is take some time, try to set aside an hour or two if you haven't played with these reports, and really learn what's in there and actually use these reports to help you better manage your programs. I mean, they are very helpful tools in the management of your program. Not only just to check progress of your funded activities, but also to make sure that you're reporting correctly in IDIS. And again, we want to make sure we're timely, we're accurate, and we're complete in our reporting. Okay, and just that last bullet point is the report generation process. It just gets easier if you keep getting in there and generating these reports. Okay, so I'm going to check the question log. I'm sure we have a lot. It doesn't look like we have a lot of time to finish up, but I will try to get a couple of these questions in. Let's see. And again, if I'm not able to get to your question right away, let's go ahead and I'll try to get these to you. Either I'll respond via email or we'll put them up on the FAQ. So one question is, we are using CDBG-R for housing rehab and report quarterly, but not in IDIS. Should I be entering accomplishment data for CDBG-R housing rehab and IDIS also? That answer is a definite yes, okay? You want to report CDBG-R accomplishments in IDIS just like regular CDBG funds. Question, can a program change be made so that program income receipts can be applied to prior year program years, as now permitted for program expenditures? Oh, very good question. So like basically adding a prior year flag for the program income receipts. Right now, I don't think I can make that recommendation to HUD, and I can pass on that idea to the programmers. But as of now, as I mentioned, if you can kind of avoid that confusion by just making a practice part of your procedures to create those receipts on the very last day of your program year. So we really didn't get into program income too much, but usually I recommend to go ahead and receipt program income each time you do a drawdown. But then also, if you're not doing any draws on that last day of the program year, go ahead, reconcile your local books with IDIS and make sure that you enter any program income receipts you haven't entered yet into the system, and that way you'll make sure you won't have to use a prior year flag. You'll just make sure that those numbers are correct for the year. Question, why aren't some of my drawdowns reflected on the PR08 report? I would have to dig into that a little deeper. I would need more information, so maybe if you can email me directly at my email address, and I'll try to walk through that. Actually, you know what? The first person to contact on that question would probably be the technical assistance unit. So go ahead and send an email or a call to the technical assistance unit, and they may have a quick and ready answer for that. Okay, is there a list of reports and an explanation of what they contain and do? I can't find one. Just people tell me, oh, you get that from this report. That's a good point. What we'll try to do in the FAQ and we had a slide in our presentation about kind of commonly used reports, and I think we may have actually had a handout in the training materials. If not, this is something we can address in the FAQ. A lot of people have been asking for that, and so it's not going to be totally comprehensive, but it will actually give you a short little resource, something that will help you out. Okay, keep moving. We got about 5 minutes left. Is there a report or a way to create a report of funds leveraged, such as a list of all activities and the funds leveraged, so that we can get a total funds leverage for the program year? If you remember on that report I just showed you, it is giving you that funds leverage for activities completed. So for any activities that were completed the program year, it's giving you that amount right there on this the PR54 report. You can see Oak Park's been doing a good job of popping those numbers in there, and they're going to get a lot of good credit for that. Whether there's another field, at the top of my head, I don't know if that's included in the PR03. I would suggest, you know, if it was included anywhere, it would probably be in the PR03 or perhaps on one of the performance measure reports. But at the top of my head, I don't know. For basically all of the information you enter into IDIS, there's also something called data downloads. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but for those folks who are familiar with database design, there's this data downloads tool over here. And what that does is it allows you to basically download any data set that you enter in IDIS. And let me go ahead and just run one real quick, and you'll see this is where you download it. The problem with this, however, is you really have to kind of have some experience with designing databases. Essentially, I can download this data, and I don't know if this one's going to be available. What you see is you download basically raw data, and it comes in as a text file, and then you're going to have to take this text file and basically bring it into a database, such as Microsoft Access. I'm just going to extract it just so I can show you what it looks like. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. So this is what they look like when you download them. Basically, it's just a lot of data, and you know you're not going to be able to do a lot with this. But if you do bring it into an Access database, you can tie things back together, and you'd be able to find that leveraged fund amount. So if you have questions about that, go ahead and submit additional questions right now, and maybe we'll try to post some information and some short steps on how to use that in the FAQ. Let me get one more in here. Are there any other reports that have to be included in the CAPER? Very good question. The reports usually requested in the CAPER are the PR03 and the PR26. We already talked about those. Also the PR23, which is a summary of accomplishments for a certain program year. And you can include the PR06, which is a summary of consolidated plan projects. That one's not usually, I mean, some CPD reps like it, some don't, but definitely do the PR03, definitely do the PR26. I would also include the definitely do the 03 and the 26. I would also do the 23, and you may just talk with your CPD representative and find out any other reports they would like to see included. Okay, so I think that's all we have in terms of time. Let me get through one or two more slides here. So again, we talked about additional resources. Everything's going to be posted to that ComCon website. Go there, check out the other webinars we did. We got a lot of good feedback, so hopefully you'll enjoy those as well. And finally, I just want to say thank you for attending. I know HUD is very excited that we've gotten a lot of good feedback and a lot of good attendance on these. I think we've had a couple hundred people at least attend each one. And just to remind you that IDIS is a very powerful tool but we have to make sure that the data is good going in. Otherwise, the data coming out on the reports is not going to be as useful. We do have an online evaluation that's going to be sent to everybody on the call in approximately 1 hour. It's very bizarre doing these webinars because I get zero feedback during the webinar. So make sure you provide feedback on that the evaluation. Let us know what we did well and what we could do better. If you have any further topics that you'd like to see on a webinar, we'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar.